He's a ghost. You'll never find him.
Even though the MCU has been around since 2008 and brought tons of big names like Iron Man, Thor, and Spider-Man to the big screen, there are still loads of awesome Marvel heroes who haven't gotten their moment in the spotlight yet. So we have made the list of heroes who aren't starring in any movies or shows, but totally deserve their shot. 10. Speedball / Penance. The story of Speedball, who later became Penance, is actually pretty wild. Both are the same guy, Robbie Baldwin, from Springdale, Connecticut. His mom Madeline was once a soap opera actress and even worked with Mary Jane Watson before switching gears and becoming a teacher. His dad Justin was a high-profile district attorney. Robbie was still a teenager when everything changed. He had a part-time gig at Hammond Research Lab, and during one of their experiments involving some strange energy from another dimension, something went wrong. Robbie got blasted by the energy, somehow made it out alive, and ended up with kinetic energy powers. He also got this super quirky costume and a bunch of floating energy bubbles that constantly surrounded him. Not long after the lab accident, Robbie finds himself in a scuffle with some thieves trying to loot the place. That's when he realizes his body now creates a kinetic energy field. It basically turns him into a human bouncy ball who's nearly impossible to hurt. He takes on the name Speedball and starts fighting crime around his hometown, Springdale, Connecticut. Even though Robbie's powers have always looked a bit goofy and got some laughs, his story takes a dark turn after a tragic event in Stamford that leaves hundreds dead. He feels the guilt and transforms into a much edgier hero named Penance, a storyline that would be amazing to see brought to life on screen. As Penance, Robbie Baldwin went through a major transformation after the Stamford tragedy. He thought his powers were gone, but they weren't. They just changed. Now, they only kick in under extreme conditions, especially when he's in serious pain. Instead of the bubbly energy from his Speedball days, his abilities became more explosive and intense. To trigger his powers, he wears the Penance suit, a brutal-looking outfit lined with 612 inward-facing spikes, one for each person who died in Stamford. 60 of those are longer, representing the children who lost their lives. The suit constantly digs into his skin, and Robbie endures it willingly, even saying he'd wear it all the time if he could. Over time, this gave him a high tolerance for pain. With his new powers, Penance can blast explosive energy from his hands, or, really, any part of his body, thanks to the spikes acting like conduits. He can unleash storm-like energy fields around him, punch with insane force by focusing the energy in his fists, and even shield himself in an energy field that makes him float and protects him from harm. His abilities keep evolving, and his old Speedball powers have started to return. Eventually, he didn't need the painful suit to activate his powers anymore, but he kept wearing it for a while anyway, partly to keep his powers sharp, and partly because of the deep guilt he still carried. 9. Beta Ray Bill. Aside from Jane Foster and a handful of others, one of the only characters ever truly worthy of wielding Mjolnir for a solid amount of time is Beta Ray Bill. He's an alien warrior who actually ended up with Thor's hammer after a showdown between the two. Odin, being Odin, decided they should duke it out to see who deserved Mjolnir more. Shockingly, Bill won, but instead of keeping the hammer, he chose not to take it from Thor. That's when Odin had a new weapon forged just for him, Stormbreaker. Beta Ray Bill isn't your average hero, he's a genetically engineered powerhouse. His consciousness was transferred into the body of a fierce, horse-like alien creature that had been enhanced with cybernetic upgrades. Thanks to this, he's insanely strong, fast, and durable, with a much longer lifespan than most beings. His iconic weapon, Stormbreaker, is similar to Mjolnir. It can transform into a cane, and when stuck to the ground, turn Bill back into his original Corbinite form. After Stormbreaker was destroyed, Bill later wielded the Twilight Sword, which is just as powerful, maybe even more so, capable of summoning the fiery energy of Muspelheim and still giving him the ability to shift back into his Corbinite form. Bill also has a pretty unique sidekick, a sentient warship named Scuttlebutt. It's more than just a ride, it houses advanced medical and humanitarian tech and even has its own personality. It can patch Bill up after battles and even projects a humanoid female avatar to interact more directly. Scuttlebutt was originally designed to help evacuate the Corbinites from their planet when Galactus came calling, so it's kind of a big deal. Since Thor's got Mjolnir back in the MCU, it'd be the perfect time to introduce someone else to take up Stormbreaker. And honestly, who better than Beta Ray Bill? Fans have been waiting for his arrival forever. He was actually supposed to appear in Thor Ragnarok, but his scene was cut. Kevin Feige later explained that the cameo felt too rushed and didn't do the character justice. So they held off, hoping to give him a proper intro down the line. Hopefully, that time is coming soon. 8. Ghost Rider. Over the years, several different characters have taken on the role of Ghost Rider, Marvel's flaming spirit of vengeance. The original was Johnny Blaze, a stuntman who made a shady deal with the devil to save his dad. That deal came with a fiery motorcycle and a mission to hunt down sinners. We saw that version in the Nicolas Cage movies. We also got a live-action version of Robbie Reyes in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., driving his badass muscle car with a techie twist. But since the MCU doesn't officially count that series, and now that Deadpool and Wolverine are cracking the door open for R-rated content, it's the perfect time to finally bring Ghost Rider into the official MCU. That said, Danny Ketch might actually be the best fit for where Marvel's headed. He's the sweet spot between Blaze's classic vibe and Reyes' modern edge. His 90s version brings a gritty, darker tone that would mesh perfectly with projects like Moon Knight, Agatha All Along, and Werewolf by Night. Brad Winderbaum, who oversees Marvel streaming, even said he'd love to bring in the Danny Ketch era, and it makes total sense. No live-action history means no fan baggage, just a clean slate with emotionally heavy stories and deep supernatural connections, especially now that Agatha All Along mentioned Mephisto by name. Plus, Ketch is connected to Jennifer Kale, who just showed up in Agatha, and the Midnight Suns crew. With Marvel slowly building a supernatural team, Blade, Moon Knight, Werewolf by Night, Black Knight, Scarlet Witch, adding Ketch to the mix as Ghost Rider feels like the natural next move. 7. Amadeus Cho. Amadeus Cho is a bit of everything, depending on who you ask. He's a young Korean-American super genius who wasted no time making his mark across the Marvel Universe after first showing up in Amazing Fantasy. Since then, he's worked his way into all kinds of major storylines and has become a key player in both science-heavy and mythological corners of Marvel. Reed Richards once said he's the 7th smartest person on Earth, but depending on who you ask, that number changes. Hank Pym thinks he's 8th, Bruce Banner says 10th, then changes his mind, and even the eternal Ajax believes he's smarter than some immortals. Hercules and Hephaestus both admit Amadeus might actually be smarter than they are, which says a lot. He can pull off insanely complex calculations in his head on the fly, like redirecting missiles or tracking the Hulk just by analyzing jump patterns. But using his brain at that level burns a ton of energy, so he needs to eat a lot afterward. He's been known to ride around on a Vespa and carry tech devices rigged to control signals around him. At one point, he got hit with something called the cathexis ray, which boosted his brain power even more and let him mess with physics in a small area. He used that power to shut down villains like MODOK, but eventually lost it when Banner reversed the effect. He once got his hands on Ant-Man's helmet and, with Cassie Lang's okay, used it not to shrink but to communicate with insects by boosting its telepathic features. He's also inherited Hercules' legendary mace and uses Banner's tech for extra tools like scanners and force fields. After Hercules died, Athena named Amadeus the new Prince of Power, giving him control over the Olympus group and access to all its crazy resources. Later on, he turned into a Hulk himself using nanotech based on gamma radiation. At first, he could stay in control, but when that started slipping, he modified the tech to create a slimmer form called Brawn, less powerful but with his mind intact. Still, when he gets really mad, the original Hulk version comes back and he loses control. To stop that, he built himself a kind of Hulkbuster armor that helps keep his emotions in check while still being super strong, maybe even stronger than his regular Hulk form. Amadeus Cho could totally shake things up in the MCU as more of a rebellious type, kind of a lone wolf, sometimes literally, since he's often seen with a coyote pup. Instead of rolling with the typical Avenger squad, he'd be traveling the globe, helping superpowered folks stay safe from the shady side of the system. He's not into authority or the usual superhero rules, which makes him stand out from most of the MCU heroes. And honestly, Marvel might have already dropped hints about him. Remember Helen Cho from Age of Ultron? That's Amadeus' mom in the comics. There's still a window to introduce him before Hulk exits for good. It'd be cool to see Bruce Banner pass the torch to a young genius who could carry on the legacy in his own unique way. Oh, and there's buzz that Helen Cho and Ultron could show up again in the Vision series, which might be where Amadeus finally enters the scene. 6. Captain Britain. Some folks might write off Captain Britain as just a British version of Captain America, but honestly, the similarities pretty much stop at the name. Brian Braddock has his own thing going on. His origin is steeped in British mythology, and he's tightly connected to the Marvel multiverse. He could seriously shake things up in the MCU. Whether he's leading the Captain Britain Corps, diving into wild adventures straight out of Alan Moore's mind, or working with MI6, there are so many directions Marvel could take his story. It's kinda crazy he hasn't shown up yet. Marvel's been setting a bunch of movies and shows in the UK lately, and we actually got a sneaky hint at Captain Britain back in Avengers Endgame. That whole time heist sequence felt like more than just a farewell to the Infinity Saga. It was also laying the groundwork for the multiverse stuff. When Tony and Steve traveled back to Camp Lehigh in the 1970s, Steve ended up overhearing Peggy Carter talking to someone about a unit that included someone named Braddock needing backup. Now, sure, that might have just been a fun Easter egg, but I really think the Russo brothers were dropping a major hint. In the comics, Brian Braddock is the one who becomes Captain Britain, and hearing that name made me think his MCU debut might not be far off. Honestly, I'm pumped for it. Originally, Captain Britain's powers came from a mystical item called the Amulet of Right, which he wore around his neck. All Brian had to do was rub it, and he'd transform from a regular guy into his superhero self, bulkier, stronger, and ready for action. The amulet could even recharge his powers when needed. He also had a cool telescoping staff, mainly used for vaulting and creating force fields. Later on, Merlin swapped it out for the Star Scepter, a mace-like weapon that also let Brian fly. Before Brian entered the alternate Earth 238, Merlin upgraded his look and fused the powers of the amulet and scepter into his suit. After Brian was killed by the villain called the Fury, Merlin brought him back and put the powers directly into him, turning the costume into more of a power regulator. Eventually, Brian didn't even need the suit anymore because his powers came from his otherworld lineage. His mom was from that dimension. He had classic superhero stats: super strength, speed, stamina, durability, flight at supersonic speeds, and even sharper senses that let him see through magical illusions. After Brian and Megan blew up the energy matrix in Otherworld, he could only hang on to his powers on Earth if he wore the suit. So now, the costume isn't just for looks, it actually works like a power source, kind of like an antenna and battery rolled into one, keeping him supercharged wherever he goes. So with all that in mind, do you still think he's just a Captain America clone? 5. Blue Marvel. The MCU is already packed with genius-level characters, and with Reed Richards on the way, that list's only growing. But if there's one guy who could really go toe-to-toe with Mr. Fantastic in the brains department, it's Adam Brashear, better known as Blue Marvel. His origin is pretty wild. Back in the 1960s, Adam gained his powers during an experiment involving antimatter and the negative zone. He started out as a superhero, but due to the racial climate of the time, the government pressured him to stay out of the spotlight and quietly continue his work behind the scenes. Eventually, Blue Marvel did return to public life, now as a seasoned and powerful hero. 4. Quazar. Quazar in the comics kind of feels like Marvel's answer to a mix between Peter Quill and Green Lantern. Wendell Vaughn starts off as a regular guy who ends up with these powerful cosmic items called the quantum bands. They let him create solid energy constructs, basically like Marvel's version of a Green Lantern ring. What makes Quazar fun is that he's got this chill, down-to-earth personality, but he's constantly thrown into wild space adventures. Sure, he's teamed up with the Avengers, but most of his stories take place out in the far reaches of the galaxy, where he's facing off against aliens, cosmic threats, and all sorts of weirdness. The contrast between his average guy vibe and the massive scale of his battles is a big part of what makes him interesting. 3. The original Human Torch. The first ever Marvel superhero wasn't who most people think. It wasn't Spider-Man or even the Fantastic Four's Johnny Storm. It was actually the original Human Torch, an android who debuted way back in Marvel Comics #1 in 1939. This version of the Torch could ignite itself at will and was one of the earliest heroes in the Marvel Universe. After spending years out of commission, he popped back up in a 1989 issue of Avengers West Coast and has made occasional appearances since. What makes him so interesting is his origin as an artificial being and his deep connection to Marvel's roots. The MCU has already shown his body, actually. His body made a blink-and-you-miss-it cameo in Captain America: The First Avenger. You can spot it on display at the Stark Expo. Honestly, he'd be perfect for a period piece-style MCU movie set in the early days of Marvel history. 2. Nomad. The name Nomad has been used by a few characters in Marvel history, including Steve Rogers himself when he stepped away from being Captain America in the 1970s. But the version that would fit best in the MCU is Jack Monroe. He originally showed up as Bucky alongside a version of Cap in the 1950s comic. Back then, those stories were just meant to be more Captain America adventures, but once Marvel brought the real Cap back in Avengers #4, it created a timeline issue. Since Steve had supposedly been frozen since the 40s, those 50s adventures couldn't have happened. So, Marvel later retconned that Cap and Bucky were imposters. The fake Cap ended up going crazy due to a flawed version of the super soldier serum, while Bucky turned out to be Jack Monroe. Jack eventually became Steve's sidekick for a while, then took on the Nomad identity and went solo. He's a great candidate to bring that man-out-of-time feel back to the MCU, especially since Steve Rogers is out of the picture. There could already be a series in the works. Reportedly, Marvel has quietly trademarked something that hasn't been announced: Marvel Studios' Nomad. Naturally, that sparked a lot of theories, but nothing has been confirmed. 1. Khazar. Khazar is basically Marvel's take on Tarzan, with a wild comic book twist. Kevin Plunder was born into a life of luxury, but ended up orphaned in the Savage Land, a hidden prehistorical jungle tucked away in Antarctica. Yeah, just go with it. He was raised by a saber-toothed tiger named Zabu and grew up to become the jungle's top warrior. Along the way, he crossed paths with the X-Men, Spider-Man, and a bunch of other Marvel heroes. What really made Khazar shine, though, was a run by Mark Waid and Andy Kubert, where he and Zabu moved to New York City. That series gave us some great fish-out-of-water moments, with Khazar adjusting to city life while still being very much a wild jungle hero. And get this, he even managed to take down Thanos during that era. He might not have superpowers in the traditional sense, but he's far from ordinary. He's a peak-level athlete with survival skills honed by a lifetime in the Savage Land. Think expert tracker, hunter, forager, basically a jungle-born survivalist who can hold his own with just a knife, a sling, or a bow and arrow. Well, that's it for today. Who do you want to see make their MCU debut next? Is there a lesser-known hero you think deserves the spotlight? Drop your picks in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed this list, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our video about more Marvel characters, upcoming films, and Disney Plus series. Catch you in the next one.